Before the highways, before the cities, before the name itself was ever spoken, this land was already alive with stories. Mist rose slowly from ancient forests. Rivers carved their paths toward the sea. Mountains stood silent, watching centuries pass. This is Washington, not just a place on a map, but a meeting point of power, nature, ambition, and memory. A land shaped by fire and ice, by dreams and conflicts, by people who arrived, settled, struggled, and stayed. To understand Washington, you have to begin with the land itself. Few places in North America hold such dramatic contrasts within such a compact space. To the west, the Pacific Ocean crashes against rugged shores. Just inland, temperate rainforests grow so dense and green they feel almost unreal, nourished by some of the highest rainfall levels on the continent. Farther east, the land changes abruptly. Forests thin, hills open into wide plains. The climate dries, the sky stretches wider, and agriculture becomes king. This sharp divide exists because of the Cascade Range, a chain of volcanic mountains that slices Washington almost perfectly in two. These mountains are not just scenic backdrops, they are active reminders that the Earth is still shaping this region. Mount Rainier, towering over everything around it, is not only the most iconic peak in the state, but also one of the most dangerous volcanoes in the United States. Beneath its snow-covered beauty lies the potential for massive lahars, volcanic mudflows that could reach nearby cities in minutes. Long before modern scientists studied these risks, indigenous peoples understood the power of this land intimately. For thousands of years, tribes such as the Coast Salish, Yakama, Spokane, and many others lived in deep connection with their environment. Salmon runs were not just food sources, they were sacred events, shaping culture, ceremony, and survival. Rivers were highways, forests were homes, mountains were teachers. When European explorers first arrived along Washington's coast in the late 18th century, they entered a world already rich with structure, trade networks, and tradition. Spanish, British, and later American expeditions competed for influence, drawn by the promise of fur, timber, and access to the Pacific. The Lewis and Clark expedition reached the mouth of the Columbia River in 1805, exhausted but convinced they had found a gateway to a continental future. That future arrived quickly and violently. As American settlers moved westward, treaties were signed and broken. Land was taken. Tribes were forced onto reservations, often far from their ancestral fishing grounds. The transformation of Washington accelerated, fueled by logging, mining, and railroads. Old-growth forests that had stood for centuries fell in decades. Towns sprang up almost overnight, then vanished just as fast when resources ran dry. Seattle, now one of the most recognizable cities in the world, began as a rough logging settlement on the edge of Elliott Bay. Its early years were marked by fires, economic collapse, and reinvention. The Great Fire of 1889 destroyed much of the city, but instead of ending Seattle's story, it reshaped it. Streets were rebuilt higher, infrastructure modernized, ambition returned stronger than before. The early 20th century brought a new identity to Washington, one tied not just to land but to innovation. Shipbuilding thrived. Aviation took root. In 1916, a small company called Boeing was founded along the Duwamish River. Few could have imagined that it would one day help define global flight, space exploration, and the region's economy for generations. At the same time, Washington became deeply connected to the power of water. Massive hydroelectric projects transformed rivers like the Columbia into engines of electricity. Dams powered factories, cities, and wartime production, turning the Pacific Northwest into an industrial powerhouse. But these projects also came at a cost, altering ecosystems and disrupting salmon migrations that indigenous communities had depended on for millennia. Then came World War II, and with it, one of the most secretive chapters in Washington's history. In the desert-like region of eastern Washington, far from major cities, the Hanford site was established as part of the Manhattan Project. Here, plutonium was produced for the atomic bomb dropped on Nagasaki. The achievement was hailed as a scientific triumph, but the environmental consequences would linger for decades. Hanford would later become one of the most contaminated nuclear sites in the world, a reminder that progress often carries shadows. By the mid-20th century, Washington stood at a crossroads. It was no longer just a frontier or a resource colony. It was becoming something else, a place where technology, environmental awareness, and cultural change collided. Cities expanded, suburbs grew, universities became centers of research and activism. And yet the land never stopped pushing back. Earthquakes rattled the region, reminding residents that the Cascadia subduction zone offshore could unleash one of the most powerful earthquakes on the planet. Volcanoes slept, but not silently. Rivers continued to demand respect. Nature here is never passive. As the world entered the digital age, Washington once again found itself at the center of transformation. In the suburbs east of Seattle, companies like Microsoft began reshaping how the world communicates, works, and thinks. A new economy emerged, one built on code instead of timber, on data instead of railroads. But growth brought new questions. Housing costs soared, inequality deepened, environmental pressures intensified. The same land that once felt endless now felt fragile. Washington's story is not a simple arc of progress. It is a layered narrative of beauty and consequence, innovation and loss, resilience and reckoning. It is a place constantly negotiating its relationship with nature, history, and the future. In the next part of our journey, we'll move deeper into Washington's modern identity, exploring its cities, cultures, conflicts, and the people redefining what it means to live at the edge of possibility. As Washington moved into the second half of the 20th century, the pace of change accelerated. What had once been a distant frontier now stood firmly within the currents of global influence. Cities grew upward and outward, industries evolved, and new voices began reshaping the state's identity from within. Seattle became the focal point of this transformation. Its skyline rose not just from steel and glass, but from ideas. The city embraced a culture of experimentation, creativity, and reinvention. Music poured out of basements and small clubs, eventually echoing around the world. In the 1990s, a raw, unpolished sound known as grunge emerged from Seattle's rainy streets, carrying with it a sense of authenticity and rebellion that defined a generation. At the same time, technology quietly embedded itself into everyday life. Microsoft expanded rapidly, drawing engineers and innovators from across the globe. Later, Amazon would transform from an online bookstore into a global logistics and technology empire, reshaping commerce itself. These companies did more than create jobs. They altered how cities functioned, how people worked, and how communities interacted. But Washington's story has never belonged solely to its urban centers. Beyond Seattle, smaller cities and rural communities faced their own transformations. Eastern Washington, long defined by agriculture, continued to feed millions. Vast wheat fields stretched to the horizon. Orchards produced apples shipped around the world. Yakima, Wenatchee, and the Tri-Cities became economic anchors, blending farming traditions with modern logistics and science. The contrast between eastern and western Washington grew sharper. Differences in climate, politics, and culture sometimes created tension, but they also reflected the state's diversity. Washington was not one place. It was many, existing side by side. Environmental awareness became a defining force during this period. As logging practices intensified in the mid-20th century, old-growth forests disappeared at alarming rates. In response, environmental movements gained momentum. Activists fought to protect remaining wilderness, salmon habitats, and coastal ecosystems. Their efforts helped establish national parks, marine sanctuaries, and conservation policies that would influence environmental thinking nationwide. Mount Rainier National Park, Olympic National Park, and North Cascades National Park became symbols of preservation, places where glaciers, forests, and wildlife were protected not for profit, but for posterity. These landscapes offered not only recreation, but perspective. They reminded residents that despite skyscrapers and satellites, the natural world still set the terms. Washington's relationship with water deepened as well. Puget Sound, a complex network of inlets and islands, became both an economic engine and an ecological challenge. Shipping lanes brought global trade. Naval bases reinforced national security. At the same time, pollution and urban runoff threatened marine life, including the endangered southern resident orca whales. Their struggle became emblematic of the broader balance Washington sought between development and responsibility. Social change also reshaped the state's identity. Washington became a destination for immigrants and refugees from Asia, Africa, Eastern Europe, and Latin America. Neighborhoods transformed, languages multiplied, food culture expanded. This influx enriched the state's cultural fabric, making it one of the most diverse regions in the Pacific Northwest. Yet progress was uneven. Rising housing costs pushed many families farther from city centers. Homelessness became a visible crisis, particularly in urban areas. Communities wrestled with questions of equity, affordability, and belonging. Washington, often seen as prosperous and progressive, confronted the reality that innovation alone could not solve deeply human problems. Meanwhile, indigenous nations continued their fight for recognition, rights, and restoration. Court rulings reaffirmed treaty fishing rights, acknowledging promises made over a century earlier. Cultural revitalization efforts strengthened languages once at risk of disappearing. Canoe journeys along the coast became powerful expressions of unity, heritage, and resilience. These moments were not symbolic, they were transformative. They reminded the state that its future depended on honoring its oldest voices as much as its newest technologies. As the 21st century unfolded, Washington faced new uncertainties. Climate change intensified wildfires in eastern forests. Glaciers retreated. Sea levels slowly rose along the coast. Scientists warned that the Cascadia subduction zone could unleash a massive earthquake at any time. Preparedness became a matter of urgency, not speculation. And yet, in the face of uncertainty, Washington continued to innovate. Research institutions led breakthroughs in medicine, renewable energy, and climate science. Communities experimented with new forms of urban planning, sustainability, and social support. The same spirit that once drove settlers westward now drove residents to imagine a more balanced future. Washington has always existed at the edge, geographically, culturally, and philosophically. It is a place where endings and beginnings blur, where forests meet servers, where ancient traditions intersect with algorithms. In the final part of our journey, we will step back and reflect on what Washington has become, and what its story reveals about the choices we all face in a rapidly changing world. As we arrive at the present moment, Washington stands not as a finished story but as a living question. It is a place constantly balancing what it was, what it is, and what it hopes to become. The forests still breathe. The mountains still watch. The cities still hum with restless energy. And through it all, the people of Washington continue to shape the meaning of home. One of the state's greatest strengths lies in its ability to adapt. Over generations, Washington has reinvented itself again and again, from indigenous homelands to frontier settlements, from timber towns to technology hubs. Each transformation brought opportunity, but also consequence. Today, the challenge is no longer how to grow, but how to grow wisely. Sustainability has become more than a concept here. It is a necessity. As climate change reshapes coastlines, forests, and weather patterns, Washington finds itself on the front lines of environmental response. Communities invest in renewable energy, restore wetlands, and rethink how cities interact with nature. These efforts are not perfect, but they reflect a deeper understanding. The future depends on cooperation with the land, not dominance over it. The revival of indigenous knowledge plays a crucial role in this shift. Traditional ecological practices, once dismissed, are now recognized as invaluable. Controlled burns help prevent catastrophic wildfires. Salmon habitat restoration draws on centuries-old understanding of river systems. Language revitalization reconnects people to place, reinforcing identity in an era of rapid change. Washington's cities continue to evolve as well. Seattle, Tacoma, Spokane, and smaller urban centers wrestle with density, affordability, and inclusion. New generations question old models of success, seeking balance between work, well-being, and community. Art, music, and storytelling remain powerful tools for reflection and connection, offering spaces where diverse voices can be heard. Education and research remain cornerstones of Washington's influence. Universities and laboratories drive discoveries that reach far beyond state borders, from medical advancements to climate modeling. These institutions attract minds from around the world, reinforcing Washington's role as a global contributor, not just a regional player. Yet for all its innovation, Washington remains deeply human. On ferry decks crossing Puget Sound, strangers share quiet moments watching the water. In small towns east of the Cascades, generations gather for harvest festivals. Along coastal beaches, families walk where tides and time converge. These everyday experiences ground the state's identity in something simple and enduring. The shadow of uncertainty still lingers. Earthquake preparedness drills remind residents of forces they cannot control. Wildfire smoke dims summer skis. Economic divides challenge the promise of shared prosperity. But Washington's response has rarely been resignation. Instead, it has been engagement, questioning, experimenting, rebuilding. There is a lesson embedded in Washington's story. Progress is not a straight line. Innovation is not inherently virtuous. And history, when ignored, repeats its hardest chapters. But when listened to, truly listened to, it becomes guidance. Washington teaches us that place matters, that landscapes shape values, that the choices we make ripple forward, sometimes far beyond our own lifetimes. It is a reminder that the future is not something we arrive at, it is something we participate in. As this journey comes to a close, we leave Washington not with a conclusion, but with an invitation. To see land as a partner, not a resource. To value memory alongside momentum. To recognize that the most powerful stories are not carved in stone or written in code. They are lived, day by day, by people willing to care. If this exploration of Washington sparked your curiosity or deepened your understanding, share your thoughts in the comments. Subscribe for more cinematic journeys through the world's most fascinating places, and pass this story along to someone who might see the land a little differently after watching. Because every place has a voice, and when we listen, we learn not just where we are, but who we are.